Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Milbree Rainey, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Children's Commission. On behalf of the Children's Commission, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Domestic Violence and Child Welfare Cases, Best Practices for Judges and Attorneys. Our speakers for today's presentation will be the Honorable Aurora Martinez Jones, Judge of the 126th District Court, who will also serve as our moderator. Also, Dr. Eloise Sepeda, founder of Harmony One Restorative Justice. Lisa, a survivor leader, and Maricarmen Garza, attorney at the Tahirih Justice Center. This webinar will focus on issues at the intersection of domestic violence and child welfare, and will address the dynamics and prevalence of domestic violence, client communication and survivor engagement, courtroom dynamics, and judicial best practices. A PDF of the PowerPoint presentation, along with the resources mentioned in the presentation, will be made available for download on the Children's Commission On-Demand Training and MCLE webpage. For those watching the live presentation, the Q&A feature is available for this webinar, and questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation if time allows. Additionally, the MCLE course number will be provided at the end of the presentation. If you're watching the webinar replay, you may email cctraining@textcourts.gov for MCLE self-reporting information. And I'll go over all this again at the end of the presentation. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to our judicial moderator, Judge Aurora Martinez Jones.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. I'm very happy to be here with everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we have an amazing panel for you today. All right. So today we are going to be talking about domestic violence in child welfare cases, and what we hope to bring you all are best practices for judges and attorneys. We got an introduction to who all we have on our panel here today, and I have to say I am just thrilled to be on this group and being able to share these awesome women with you. We are hoping to bring you these best practices, both through tips, hearing from myself and from Maricarmen Garza, an amazing attorney, but also some awesome advocates, Dr. Eloise Sepeda and Lisa. Their stories are going to be very helpful, I think, for us attorneys and judges to really understand where we can make the biggest impact and how we can do the best possible for the families that we serve. Before we go into some level setting about what is domestic violence, I want to give us a moment to talk about very important month that we're in and to have a moment of reflection. Dr. Sepeda, if I could turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Judge. I'm in lieu of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, DVAM, and the topic of discussion today, I'd like to invite each one of you to take a moment of silence, about 30 seconds, to honor the lives of survivors taken by the choice of their partner to use lethal violence, as well as holding their children left behind in our hearts. Thank you. I would also like to offer a disclaimer. As survivor leaders, we will share real stories based on our personal and professional experiences. And please keep in mind that we do not speak for every survivor. Each person has their own unique story to tell and their own experiences that they carry. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Wonderful. And so we do want to make sure we go into this conversation with a big picture look at what we're talking about. So I'm going to turn it over to Maricarmen. If you could help us talk about what is domestic violence, and feel free to let me know when you're ready for the next slide.
Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So one of the things that I was asked to do is to define what domestic violence is. What really is it? And the truth is that we use the terms domestic violence and family violence often interchangeably, but they're really not. Domestic violence is a more expansive term that is used to describe violence between intimate partners. It goes beyond the physical violence or threats of physical violence that cause or are intended to cause fear of imminent bodily injury, which is the Texas family violence definition. Domestic violence is not only physical, it can also be sexual in all of its spectrum. It could be psychological, emotional, financial, digital actions, or threats of actions. Domestic violence includes actions and patterns of behavior that are used by one partner to gain or maintain control over the other. This is something that advocates and survivors have known for many, many years. And I still remember in 2014 reading the opinion in U.S. versus Castleman, where Sonia Sotomayor said that it is the accumulation of said acts over time that can subject one intimate partner to the other partner's control. Power and control is the point of domestic violence, and that is where coercive action control starts to show itself. Next slide, please. So the definition of domestic violence and coercive control can show up in many, many ways. And some examples of what it looks like isolating a partner from their support system. It looks like excessively monitoring a partner's activity throughout the day, denying a person's freedom and autonomy, lying, gaslighting, name-calling, putting another partner down, limiting access to money, turning the kids against them, making jealous accusations, regulating sexual relationship between the partners, threatening pets, children, providing false information about one's rights, or using immigration status against a partner or another. And it may not be the partner, it could also be threatening that against a family member. Next slide.
Thank you. So I want to share that we have an extraordinary experience, and I know especially as a judge, I don't often get to hear the very intimate details. I kind of get whatever the parties present to me. And so I think it is very unique, and I'm very grateful to our panelists here today who are willing to share their stories, and to the Children's Commission for giving them the platform to do that. I would like to take this opportunity now to share with everyone who is listening in the amazing panelists that we have and give them the ability to share their experience. And we'll start with Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. My name is Lisa, and I'm honored to be co-working with my esteemed co-panelists for the work we're doing. Thank you for making time in your schedule to learn and grow with us, especially in these hard times where we might be worried about friends or families today in storm-impacted areas. I greatly appreciate you. Some people call me a survivor leader. Some people call me an expert in areas of the dynamics and effects of interpersonal violence, healing, and recovery. I call myself a survivor extraordinaire, but that's just because I feel like I've overcome a lot of things. And I feel like all survivors are pretty extraordinary with navigating these systems and barriers that are put in front of us to help us and our children and our families be safer and be whole in our communities. It is true that I've helped with a lot of actions, sat on a lot of boards, hosted some events, assisted with legislating peer support in Texas, and recently for domestic violence housing programs across the state. I have worked closely with survivors for over a decade, building a team of survivors, working with survivors of interpersonal violence to build a community of support for those navigating systems for their safety and well-being. I am here today because I have hope for our future and the safety of our communities. I believe that together we can help save lives and heal families. I know a lot of things now that I didn't know when I was seeking safety, running for my life. I didn't know it when I was a kid, put into child welfare group homes and juvenile detention centers, when I told people that my stepfather choked me, and came into my bedroom at night. I didn't know that when I was a child of a victim of physical and sexual abuse, that I would be treated like the criminal when the perpetrator would be celebrated and go on to have their full career and even adopt more children to abuse. I didn't know that those experiences would set me up to be victimized repeatedly through my life, would cause me to be trafficked as a minor, would cause me to blame myself for what others did to me, and eventually land me in a 13-year domestic violence relationship with 3 beautiful children that all deserve safety. I didn't know I was repeating cycles of violence and trauma. As an adult seeking safety for our family, I didn't know that I would still be considered a criminal, that my sanity would be questioned, that I would be asked about my sex life with my abusive partner who forced me to do things on camera I never want to talk about, but would also ask me about my religious beliefs as if my religion mattered more than what our family was enduring. I didn't know that when I would beg for help, that I would be blamed, that after a week of fighting, being kicked out and dragged back into our house, kicked out, climbing in windows, with my kids hiding me in the closet for weeks at a time, while the perpetrator took all the phones. And one day when he stepped out, I frantically found a phone and connected it to the outside pole to call the police. By the time I got done with police, who threatened me with removing my children, "We don't play this here. We will take your kids. You can learn to get along or you lose." I'm sorry. So it's hard for me to think of these times. While this was happening, the police were talking to him, and he went to the school and stole 2 of our children. I left with 1 of my 3 children. Who does that? Who leaves their kid in a burning building or a sinking ship? I did that. I did that to seek safety for all of us. I went to the shelter that told me they didn't have space, calling in a panic and begging all the way, "I can't do this again. I've tried leaving before and it has never worked. He is going to kill me." He took the kids, and somehow, some way, they found space for us who were broken and exhausted, us with a mixed match bag of clothes and nothing else. I used every service in that agency, every single thing. I desperately wanted to find another way to live because the way I was living was going to kill us all. My children had been getting in front of me to keep me from getting strangled. It was not safe for any of us anymore, and I couldn't keep them safe anymore. My case involved several states, prior DV charges. I was advised not to go get my kids from school like he had done, that I might damage my case. And I couldn't find attorneys. My case was complicated. I finally got UT Law School help, and they are amazing, but also they are not experienced and quite often not educated in domestic violence or family law. My lawyer was going to do stuff with businesses. They really had no interest in what we were doing, and although they might have cared, they definitely didn't have the expertise I needed. This would be a 2-year battle where I would lose custody. And on the day I lost custody, I walked out of court with my head held high. And I immediately went to a small chamber and went under a table where those lawyers preceded me that I needed to pull myself together because they got me visitation tonight. While I begged to please fix it, please go away, because my children could not see me this broken. And I could not pull myself together in a few short hours. I didn't know that this would be a 5-year process in courts that risked my kids' lives repeatedly, that they would force us through child visitation and child exchange to be in situations where my children saw me sexually assaulted, where they were berated and laughed at and made late for buses so we could leave. And while they would be screamed and verbally abused at each hour of the drive to get to me and to leave. One night, I got a call from a police station in Hutto, Texas, asking me to pick up my kids because they were unsafe with their father, just like I had been telling people. I found a ride to another city, picked up our kids, and thus broke our custody agreement. He then used the system to chase us down as I tried to protect us again, get them enrolled in school to no avail. Time and time again, different police departments showed up, questioned my children, refused to take them from me because they were not safe. And yet I was breaking a custody order. Eventually, the police came and said, "We will put you in jail." And I had to choose between never getting my children back because of breaking a custody order and going to jail, or finding the strength to fight for them again. I released them and let them go home to a dangerous situation. And I searched for another lawyer. And luckily, an agency was able to find me a pro bono lawyer. We've been nearly 18 years apart. I am still afraid for my life. I'm afraid for my children's lives. My son never made it out of violence, but he helped get my daughter out. And now my son is repeating the cycle of violence. He and my ex at the beginning of the pandemic said they have enough ammo and weapons and MREs to get through 2 years. And whoever is attacking them, I don't know who that would be, but he won in court. He still hates me and he still hates y'all. None of us are safe. And now my children, my son and my grandchildren are not safe. I am here today because I believe that together we can create safer families, that I don't have to stand and read as many names of fallen women through domestic violence every year again, and yet every year the numbers grow. I believe that together we can make change and we can create safety like I have done for my daughters, and have productive, healthy lives where we are engaged in our communities. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate you being here. And I know this is hard to hear. It's going to get a little easier over time and as we discuss laws, but I appreciate your time and I appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you being willing to share today with the other attorneys and judges who are listening in. And each time I hear you speak, I just think about all the places in my legal brain where something different could have happened. And I think you mentioned that's why you're here. So hopefully in the future, we can be making a difference. I want to go into the next experience that we want to share. Dr. Eloise Sepeda, I'm very happy that you are also joining us, another powerful advocate. Would love to turn it over to you for your experience.
Thank you, Judge. First want to offer Lisa some sister love today. Thank you for sharing. I am a mom and a grandmother. I am the matriarch of my family. I'm Native Kickapoo and Latina. I'm strong, I'm fierce, I'm a warrior healer. I'm an SME, restorative justice and transformative justice practitioner with local and national contributions. And I too am a child and adult survivor. I have, Lisa, you got me going here. I have violence in the home was all I knew. As a young child, growing up, it's all I knew. It's all I heard, it's all I saw. And I was the main child who saw this. And so as I would try to rescue my mom and pound on my dad's leg, I would get thrown across the room or beat for opening my mouth and just not being quiet and going to the room. And so it was all I knew. Violence was all I knew. I knew it in my home. I knew it in my family. I knew it in my community. It had been normalized to see and experience violence. And the idea of healthy relationships didn't make sense to me. even the families I saw on TV, it didn't make sense to me. I thought, oh, this can't be real. This has to be fake. And so throughout my experiences as a child, I was conditioned also to really internalize a lot of that pain. And I learned early how to walk on eggshells. I learned early how to read a room. I learned really early how to read people and facial expressions and body language. I learned really early how to do all of those things to keep myself and my siblings safe. My number one goal as a child was to protect my younger sister and my younger brother and keep them safe and send them to the room or take them outside and do those things. My mom was an amazing mom. She did the best she could, working multiple jobs. She provided a home for us. She nurtured us the best she could. From cuddles on the couch to an early Saturday breakfast. We knew love the way that she showed us love. And we knew that she also was safety planning in her own way. We were going to grandma's house. We were going out to run errands. We were, encouraged to go spend the night with a cousin, and very few cousins. My mom didn't let us go and just anywhere, but I can count on one hand how many cousins we got to spend the night with, and we understood. I understood that my mom was doing everything she could to keep us safe, and yet I was extremely worried about whether or not I was going to see my mom again. And so, fast forwarding into, into my young elementary ages, I was fighting. I was showing these signs of aggression. I was doing all of these things, and then into middle school, I was fighting. I was getting kicked out of school. Nobody was asking the questions. Nobody was asking, how can we help you? What's going on? Anything like that. And to be honest, if they did, I probably wouldn't have said anything, because we also knew that systems weren't set up to help us. We also knew they're going to take you away. They're going to lock you up. They're going to pull us apart. They're going to do all of these things. And so while no one was asking, I also wasn't telling. And then I was brutally sexually assaulted at a young age, and literally left on the side of the road for death. Like a neighbor found me, and I was taken to the hospital, and I was hospitalized for a couple of weeks. And in that experience, health professionals, law enforcement, still said things and to me in a way, and during their investigation in child welfare, in a way that implied that it was my fault. Well, what was I doing? Well, what was I wearing? Well, what was all of these different factors that I could have done to prevent this from happening, rather than who did this to you and why did they do this to you? And so I was filled with anger. I was filled with hate. I didn't trust anybody, young, old, adults, you name it. I didn't trust anybody. And I met my partner, who I thought was going to be my protector. Finally, I was going to have a guy in my life that was going to be my protector, until he wasn't. And that table turned, and I needed protection from him. I was in extreme danger. A gun to my head, a knife to my throat was common. That was a part of daily, if not weekly, events that I was having to survive from. Protecting myself while I was pregnant, being brutally abused while I was pregnant. And I remember just being curled up in a corner, protecting my stomach. I remember being strangled until I was unconscious at 8 months pregnant. Like, I remember these extreme things I had to survive through. And then I was pregnant with my second child, which he did not allow me to use birth control, because he believed that I was hiding something. I was cheating. Why did I need birth control if I was only with him? And we know that people who use violence also will corner people. They'll use their power and control to corner survivors to become pregnant, so that they are bound to their partner, and have to share a lifetime, because they share a child now, and systems say they have to share a child. And so he used this in a way to keep me, because he knew that I wanted out. He knew that. And I was held hostage at gunpoint through the first portion of my pregnancy, to make sure that I kept my child, to make sure that I passed any dates that I could make an alternative decision. And so he knew these things. He knew the system just as much as anybody else, and he knew how to work the system. And so eventually I get free, and I'm homeless because I didn't want to go with family. Family was often threatened. Family was often used against me. And so I know what it's like to sleep in a car. I know what it's like to stay awake all night while I made a little bed in the back seat for my kiddos. I know what it's like to live in someone's attic. I know what it's like to live in motels. I know what it's like to really do everything that you can in order to not just for me to be with my child, but also children, but also for me to protect them from him and from the world. At this point, he was incarcerated at some point, not because of what he did to me, despite all of the years of abuse, but he was incarcerated for continuous harm that he caused in our community through gun violence, robberies, aggravated assaults, all the signs that showed how dangerous he was. And yet every time he got out, he called and reported me. I had to share custody. I had to let him see the kids, just to find out later that he was leaving them alone by themselves to go on a crack binge. He was leaving them. He was trying to force them to fight each other. He was really trying to embed that lifestyle that he lived in them, that I was trying so hard to protect them from. The lack of health care that I received and my children received was also impacted. We didn't trust the healthcare system, and we didn't trust the people that worked in the healthcare system, because when we did go, a lot of the questions were asked, again, implying what am I doing wrong as a person. When he finally got a charge that stuck, I saved up money. I paid for my own divorce, and I'll never forget it. It was $177, and I had $178. And I went and I filed myself, and I stood before a judge, and I'm telling him, like, I need this divorce. And I don't know what I said, to be honest, that triggered a deeper thought within that judge. But he called for a recess, and he called me forward, and he says, have you considered getting an attorney? And I said, I can't afford an attorney. I could barely afford this. And so he called out into the courtroom and asked if there was an attorney that would take a case that would be open and closed that day, pro bono. And someone stepped forward, and I walked out of there with full custody, an order for child support, even though my partner, or former partner at the time, was going to spend 10 to 20 years in prison. I was able to walk out with a confidentiality agreement that I could take to every single school that my children were in, because we had gone through 13 schools. He was always finding us, even if he was incarcerated. We had high levels of complex trauma. I was diagnosed, my children were diagnosed, in addition to anxiety, depression, ADHD, all the things. And he used that against me. He made me feel like I was crazy. And he made others believe that I was crazy, because he was really good at gaslighting, or whispering threats that I would be very reactive to. And so everybody just thought I was out of control and I was aggressive. I had to battle child welfare myself, and I had, as I mentioned, I had to share that custody with him. And so it felt like a lifetime sentence to get free of power and control, because not only did I shift from a relationship of power and control, but I also had to navigate systems that now had power and control over me and what I did and didn't do. And I didn't go to a DBSA agency. I never called an 800. I just didn't have the trust for people. And so I was questioned about my decisions and my choices that I was doing that I knew was best because I knew him best. And I knew what to prepare for, 10 steps ahead. And yet I was constantly questioned that. And I believe that our support for survivors today that I needed and that we can offer to survivors today it starts with the transitioning of our mindset from wraparound services, the idea of wraparound services to holistic freedom, the holistic freedom that's inclusive of physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually free because they are all interconnected. And when we are free across the board and aligned, then we can thrive and then we can achieve well-being. It's not wraparound services that's going to get us there. It's the holistic freedom that's going to get us there. And so as we learn how to navigate these systems, we also learn how to navigate these spaces as survivor leaders as well. And it's extremely important that the modeling that Judge Martinez Jones and Maricarmen and Milbury is doing today about how to engage with survivors is noted. That we've spent time together. We're co-designing together. We're processing together. We're building together, not just today, but ongoing. And so I invite you to do that as well in your communities and with the people, the survivors and the people who use violence that you're serving and supporting. Judge?
Thank you so much, Eloise. I feel so lucky to know you. Every single time I hear you speak, I feel like I grow stronger as a judge, and I thank you so, so much. And so we took the time earlier to acknowledge the difference in experiences, and there are very, very different experiences amongst survivors. And let's talk a little bit about how prevalent that is. Maricarmen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Lisa and Eloise, for sharing so bravely your stories. And, I've been practicing domestic violence law, and that's what I call it, for the last 28 years. And each story of every client that I represented are uniquely different. And yet there is such a high prevalence of domestic violence in our country, in this world. And I'm always surprised how every time I present with a case, these are the types of cases that individuals always look at with skepticism, whether there's violence or not. And the statistics show that the prevalence is incredible. The most recent statistics from 2024 is that 1 in 2 women and more than 2 in 5 men report experiencing intimate partner violence at some point in their lifetime. And 1 in 5 children in the United States are exposed to parental or caregiver interpersonal violence. Just in Texas in 2023, out of the 164 child abuse and neglect fatalities, 96 of those cases had documented history of domestic violence. 68 of those families had active domestic violence presence in their home environment. These numbers are staggering. There is consistent research that illustrates that this high level of domestic violence and child maltreatment occurs. In fact, it is 56.8% of children who will experience both interpersonal violence in their home and maltreatment at some point in their lives. Next slide, please. These are some additional prevalence numbers for Texas. Here we're showing you the numbers for 2022 of the individuals who were murdered in our state due to family violence. The brand new numbers for 2023 were just released earlier this October, and they're incredibly similar. In 2023, there was 205 Texas victims who died at the hands of the intimate partners. 179 of them were women and 26 of them were men. The victims range from ages It is not just a certain age. They were from 15 years old to 88 years old. In these situations, an additional 16 family members, friends, or bystanders were killed. 12 victims were injured. And the victims included 4 children who were killed and 3 children who were injured. Overall, 218 adults and children lost parents due to domestic violence in 2023. So when we're looking at how often it happens, it is really, really quite staggering. And if we go to the next slide, this prevalence is something also that shows up very disproportionately in some communities. Although we know that domestic violence or intimate partner violence occurs without regard to race, culture, education, socioeconomic background, it is also well known that it disproportionately affects minority women in the United States. In a couple of more slides, we'll be discussing some barriers to leaving domestic violence relationships. And typically what we know that the more oppressed a community is, the more barriers they're likely to have.
Thank you so much, Maricarmen. And as is the case in my court, and I think in most courts across the state and across the country, when I look at the types of cases that I have in my court, especially on my child welfare dockets, usually the first main issue is substance abuse, and the second very strong issue and very clear issue is family violence. And so most courts that I know are consistently battling the two, oftentimes together, but family violence is one of the biggest issues that we do see in our child welfare dockets. And so then we always have questions that come up when especially judges are trying to consider protective factors, safety, and what is going on in the family and the family dynamic. This question gets asked, why didn't she leave? Not sure if that's the question we should be asking, as we've heard through the experiences that were shared earlier. But I do want to take some time and talk a little bit about these questions that get asked and the experiences that people have shared. Let me turn it over to Lisa and Eloise.
Thank you, Judge. I would just start by saying another transition that we're making in this work is shifting from, and to consider during the case planning, is shifting from survivor-centered to survivor-leader. Survivor-centered makes us feel like there's no way out, like we are surrounded and suffocated by systems and all the intersections that we have to navigate. Survivor leader really takes into consideration, again, what we know has kept us safe and what we know about our partner and what we know that our children need versus what people outside of our home are saying that we need. So that is why we prefer the term, the transition to survivor leadership. The threat or fear of loss of custody, I think both Lisa and I shared about the impact and the requirements of systems to share custody, to make those child exchanges, despite the danger that we have shared when we've had to share that that the other parent wasn't capable or able or by choice not willing to provide a safe atmosphere for our children. I think the other caveat is that there are a lack of resources for people who use violence as well. And so the question about why didn't she leave is painful when we don't take the time to really understand or to listen, or the information that we've shared is used against us. So one of the things that I say often in my trainings around domestic violence is, can I trust you with my truth? And it's really starting there. And why am I asking these questions? Am I trying to get through a docket? Am I trying to get through another case? Am I trying to get through another service provision? Or am I really trying to understand and meet every survivor's unique needs and their children?
And I think y'all both talked a lot about a lot of the factors that we've put up on this screen. And then I heard from you, Eloise, and especially Lisa, I heard from you about why you were staying and what was the analysis that went through your mind when you were trying to consider that. Lisa, did you want to add anything else on that?
I do. One of the things that we don't consider is leaving is the most dangerous time. It is deadly. I think I alluded to it in some of my experience that I shared, but I see it over and over again with survivors we work with. We get mixed messages. The person that was hurting me was kicking me out and making me come back in. When I called for help, they said there was no help. I said, I've tried to do this before. One program offered me 2 weeks. 2 weeks was definitely going to get me killed. If I left for 2 weeks and had to come back, everything was my fault. And I made things worse for him. And we would have nowhere to go. Services are a wait list. I wish we all had everything that people need for safety and the resources that we need. But the truth is, and I work in a great agency that is the Cadillac of wait list. We have all the services. However, getting to them could take 6 months to a year. We don't even have shelter unless you have been shot or set on fire today, and the person who did it is still at large, not already picked up by police. So if you have been shot and they found the person, we still have people more at risk than you. We don't have space. So go where? Do what? When we say, why don't you just leave? I think in our heads, we all have these ideas. And I have to say, as a white person, I was raised to believe systems help me. And when I was a child, the system locked me up. And when I reached for help as an adult, the system harmed me. I learned that the system was not here to help me over and over again, that all services are a lottery. Do they have staff available? Are the staff trained? Do they still have funding? Because that goes really quick. And so why don't we leave? I tried. Most people do try. And also, from the beginning, when we want to leave, first we want someone else to be better. We wanted them. Eloise said it. I thought I found my protector. I thought I finally would have a family. Me too. Me too. I wanted that white picket fence and I got it, but it turned out to be hell inside and behind the fences.
And so I know, Eloise, you also mentioned the mindset and changing the mindset and thinking about what questions we should be asking. I know we started talking about that when we were preparing and thinking about the person using violence and what kind of questions do we ask them? And are we asking them the kinds of questions that we should? But we did want to share some other considerations and thoughts, and just any last word on this section, Eloise, because I know we're going to move into some attorney and judicial perspectives and hearing so much great words of wisdom and beautiful experiences helping us to be better.
Thank you, Judge. My conversation with survivors, with judges, conversation with judges too. My conversation with survivors is more like, what do you need to feel safe, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? What do you believe your partner needs to stop using violence and or to stop hurting your family? These kind of questions can lead to deeper conversations because, again, we must always remember that they know their partner better and we know our partners better than anyone else. And yet we can still never answer the question that we likely asked ourselves, which is, why does someone that I love choose to not love me back in the way that I need it? I think another opportunity in having a conversation such as this is that as a survivor answers, they're going to mention the need for mental health services. They're going to mention the need for substance abuse recovery or inpatient support. They're going to mention the need for classes or better understanding of whatever it is that they're needing at the time, even if it's how to navigate the immigration system, right? They're going to tell you what they need, and these type of relational questions can also be used to build that deeper relationship, because we're asking in a way that we're not implying that it's their fault, whether we're asking why didn't she leave or why did they choose to hurt you, because we can't answer that question either. So I hope that's helpful, Judge.
Yes, very helpful.
I think I'd like to acknowledge too that we wouldn't be in the family courts if we weren't trying to leave. That
Yeah.
is what we are actively doing.
That is a wonderful point. Thank you, Lisa. And this really goes into Maricarmen, a lot of what you specialize in doing, and really how as an attorney should we be communicating with our survivors, making sure that we have them engaged in a way so that we can provide support. I think a lot of us want to, and we just don't go about it in the right way. Maricarmen, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I think just listening to Lisa and Dr. Sepeda today is really important. As we listen to them, we as attorneys should realize that there's so many barriers in place for an individual to really escape an abusive relationship and to do it safely. So listening to survivors, listening to your client is incredibly important, because until we do something to address those barriers that each of them have talked about, and your client will have other barriers as well, the outcome will not be any different. So on this slide, what is a typical survivor? Where there is no such thing as a typical survivor. And I'm going to start with the slides from the bottom up. And the truth is that some survivors will never identify and will never seek services as a survivor. So there will be individuals, clients that you see, individuals in your courtroom who are going through domestic violence and experiencing some of these barriers, but you will not know this. But it's still incredibly important to try to ask those questions to address so that you can have a safe outcome for the family. Another thing that's really important, and with the 28 years that I've had, each one of my clients had a very different outlook, experience, demeanor in how they were addressing moving through the family court. Trauma impacts individuals in so many ways. Some clients may show up angry that, despite everything that they've done, here they are in this situation with the threat of their children being removed. Worse yet, that the person who abused them, who hurt them, might be the caregiver now of their children. So these could be many, many ways that somebody will show up. And it's incredibly important that we look, listen, and really understand what trauma can do in an individual's life. I think as lawyers and as judges, we too are impacted by the trauma that we hear. So I do invite everybody that is listening and watching today to please take care of yourselves. These stories are real and they really impact us as well. So it's incredibly important that we know, first and foremost, no such thing as a typical survivor. And in fact, if there are things that you're not understanding, we always believe survivors, educate yourself, find an expert, learn about the different ways that trauma impacts somebody, and then you'll be in a much better place to be able to advocate and to understand the case right before you. Next slide, please. The part of communication with your client is incredibly critical. We talked about power and control. That is what domestic violence is. So to start removing those layers of power and control and start empowering and giving agency to an individual, we must be very clear about the work that we're doing, who the people in the courtroom are, what each person's role is, what the evidence is or is not, what the standards are for the court. The more information that we have, we better empower the survivor to start really making better decisions for themselves. It is incredibly important to be prepared for court and mediation. If you're working with somebody who is still in a safety concerned situation, you must do safety planning before going to court, before going to mediation. How are they going to get there? Because there's one thing that we do know is that their abusers and their abuser's family know exactly where they will be that day. So it's really important to prepare for the facts, prepare for court, but also make sure that you're ready for court. Have somebody available for the survivor after the proceedings, because whatever they are, these are probably one of the most traumatic things that they will ever experience. So having something ready to who they're going to talk to afterwards or how they're going to get home is critical to this as well. Always read the case file and ask questions to understand the records. What you don't understand, bring in an expert to try to understand those things. I still remember a case where what the case file said, left shelter and abandoned protective order. And as I started talking to my client, right, this was a very terrible, situation, and child welfare was accusing that this was not a protective parent. We learned that she left that particular shelter because another opening happened in the nearby city where the client actually lived her whole life. And also that she abandoned the protective order because that is how the abuser was finding her each and every time and putting the children in danger. So in that situation, these facts that look terrible were really actually the facts of a very protective parent. So read it, talk to experts, and educate yourself. Next slide, please.
Well, and Maricarmen, if you don't mind, I'll take over and move us through the rest of these slides so that we can definitely make sure we touch on all of the topics we hope to discuss today. And I know our time is coming to an end, but I wanted to say, Maricarmen, a lot of the things that you're talking about, I've seen happen in my court with really good lawyers who really understand what's going on. And I will say from the court's perspective, what I try and do and what I see good lawyers doing is three big things if we can think about it in our mind. It's being trauma responsive, it's being culturally responsive, and it's also doing active listening. And we can do that as lawyers, as advocates, we can do that as judges as well. Some of the tips that we have here about engaging survivors really lend to those types of ways in which we interact with the survivors who are in our court. And so we will be sharing the slides so that you can see this. I've seen good lawyers who focus on the survivor parents' protective factors and strengths. I've seen them advocate in court that way and help the court understand this is why my client made this decision, and this is why she is a safe parent to keep her children in her home. We have talked about really thinking about the questions we need to ask and thinking about the trauma that our survivor parents also have been through. In child welfare, we constantly think about our kids and the trauma that they've experienced, but we do need to realize, and hopefully with the experiences that you heard today firsthand, you understand that those parents are also our kids who experienced trauma. And they still have that. They may not have grown through it, and they may need some support. And some of what we're seeing in court may be the reaction to the trauma that they have so deeply set in. And oftentimes, just as Lisa said, they're in court. That means they are actively trying to do the thing that we're all saying is going to be the protective factor that we identify as a system, but we're just not seeing it. That change in mindset and really looking at things that way, I think, is something that we need to make sure we build into our practices. All of this, of course, is in the best interest of children. Over all my years that I have engaged with children, I've been on the bench, I've had child conferences, I have rarely had the occasion in which, even though things were really bad at home, and maybe a child knows things are not safe, children want to be with their parents. And so we really have to work hard to support those parent-child relationships, especially when we have a survivor parent who has been making every effort in their capacity under coercion and control to be the best parent that they can be in their circumstances. And one of the things I like to do in court when I have the opportunity and I hear what's going on and I see a parent who is trying hard, but they have the lack of resources, they're getting turned away at shelters, I often ask, is there anything I can do as a judge, as a judge to help your situation be better. And that implores all of those things that we were talking about, being trauma informed and also being an active listener. But another thing that does, I think, whenever we as people in power, as Eloise talked about in systems, working with those who have been controlled, is lending some of our power out and giving the survivor the opportunity to tell me, judge, what do they need, rather than me, judge, telling them what they need. And it makes a big difference. And the kinds of requests that I've gotten from parents have been things that I don't think I would have thought of if I had not just asked. And that's a simple thing that we can do, and giving that power back to survivor parents so that we can best help them. In the courtroom, I want to shift just a little bit, especially for the judges, to give you an idea of some of the thoughts that I have often thought about when looking at cases that involve family violence. There are a few slides in here that talk about the issues that we're going through, and I hope the attorneys also understand when we know we have a family violence case, especially if I hear about strangulation, firearms, weapons being used, I am on high alert. I am looking around that courtroom and making sure that people are safe. The positioning of everyone is safe. If I need extra deputies, they're there. If the survivor parent or child is not comfortable with the setup in the courtroom or the dynamics, that I'm doing things that I can to change that and have everyone feel safe when they're in the courtroom. For me, that is part of the decorum in the courtroom. I think attorneys can be mindful in letting the court know about this. I'm constantly thinking about the dynamic with the family, but I'm also considering how is that playing out in my courtroom? Is the way that people are sitting make one position seem to be more powerful? And if there is this nice chair on one side where the person using violence is sitting, and maybe not so nice of a chair on the other side where the survivor parent is sitting, how is that impacting them? And is that something I can change? Because usually it is. And so those are the kinds of things, even whenever we are on the bench thinking about our courtrooms and working with families in this situation, we need to be thinking about. We need to follow due process. People need to be admonished, and especially people who may not be used to being admonished, like a person who's using violence. And that shows the perceived justice as well, especially as we listen to experiences where maybe they did not believe the system was going to support them. As survivor parents, seeing that happen in the courtroom may change as well. So with the slides, I have a few other things to consider if you haven't already taken that into consideration. But attorneys, please know that the judges are thinking about these things, and I would love for a lawyer to let me know if there's something more I can do in the courtroom dynamics. Give us a heads up so we can make sure everybody is safe, and let us know if we are in a state where people are agitated, or if people don't want to speak and they need some calm space, if they need to step out. All of these are things within our control that we can handle. We have a couple extra slides, and I am going to skip kind of through these because these are in the Children's Commission's bench book. And if you do not have one, please get one. It is on the website, and it is a robust source of information, but these do contain a lot of judicial best practices that I want to make sure everybody understands. I am going to just make a quick mention on mediation dynamics. We do know there's an exception for family violence. I think just as every experience is different, every family is unique, and we need to do what's safe and best and led by the survivor's comfort level when we're thinking about mediation as well. We do also have some resources to share. Those are here listed as well as our contact information so that you all can get a hold of us if you need to. As I said, these will be sent out. Just some closing remarks are thank you to this panel. Thank you to Eloise. Thank you to Lisa. Thank you to Maricarmen, and very, very big thank you to the Children's Commission for giving us this space to bring this to the attorneys and judges in Texas. I turn it over to Milbury.
Thank you so much, Judge. Everyone, that's our time for today. On behalf of the Children's Commission, I also want to thank Judge Martinez Jones, Dr. Eloise Sepeda, Lisa, Maricarmen Garza for their very informative presentation. We encourage you all to submit any questions that you might have to the speakers. Our contact information was in the slide above that Judge clipped through real quickly. Thank you all for watching today's presentation. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar on November the 22nd. It's entitled Trial Skills for Child Welfare Cases, Preserving the Record for Appeal. Additional information about that webinar will be on the Children's Commission On-Demand Training and MCLE webpage shortly. The State Bar has approved today's course on domestic violence and children's child welfare cases for 1 hour of MCLE credit. Those watching the replay of this course may contact CC Training at textcourts.gov for MCLE self-report information. At the conclusion of this presentation, a brief anonymous survey will appear on your screen. The survey is meant to assist the Children's Commission in providing future relevant training topics for child welfare practitioners and judges. So please take a few moments to complete the survey. Also, this course has been approved by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization for 1 hour of certification and recertification credit for attorneys and paralegals in 2 areas, the specialty area of child welfare law and family law. Additionally, this course was approved for family violence credit hours. So judges, please email the Commission's training inbox for more information. And again, that email is cctraining@textcourts.gov. You'll receive a follow-up email within the next 24 hours with MCLE information for your records. Thank you all again so much for joining us. Thank you to the speakers. Have a wonderful rest of your day.